Okay, so the crucifixion is this defining moment in Christianity, right? It's when we all become saved. It's when Jesus made the sacrifice. But listen to what we hear in Mark 15, 40. There were also women looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. They used to follow him and provide for him when he was in Galilee. And there were many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem. So we look at this and it seems like a side note. Oh, okay, there's all these women here. But here's what we need to remember. So at this point, all the apostles had fled except for John. John the Apostle, not John the Baptist, just so we're clear. But so all the other apostles were in hiding. They were afraid to be associated with Jesus. And what we see is these women who are also associated with Jesus, they come to the crucifixion. And more than that, I want to give you this, this quote from the Christian History Institute. Women were the last disciples at the cross and the first at the empty tomb. They remained integral to the work of the church in its early centuries. So let's break that statement down. So we know from Matthew, Mark, and John that there were at least 3 women present at the crucifixion. And you have to remember that when we see Jesus portrayed on the cross now, he's usually, he's very sad, but he's hanging there, he's very clean. That would not have been the reality of the crucifixion. Okay, so you have to keep in mind, they showed up. Okay, they took him, like all these guards for one Jesus. All these guards came in and they had clubs, they had weapons, and they took him and they flogged him. And we don't see floggings in the modern world, but they would have taken something like a whip or a cat of 9 tails and hit it against his back multiple times, and when this happens, we don't think about this, but it actually makes the flesh come apart. So here he is, he's got, the flesh pulled apart from his skin. We don't know how many times they flogged him, but I bet you anything it wasn't once. Right? This is probably something they did 10, 15, 20 times until his back was bleeding and very painful. It probably looked a lot like hamburger meat. And so then, they placed this crown of thorns on him, and people are in the streets mocking him and, spitting on him. And the women are there. And they're watching this happen. Hold on to that thought. So his back is bleeding. This crown of thorns is placed on his head. There's going to be blood pouring down his face. When he got flogged, he might have, bit the inside of his mouth. We don't know. But it's very possible that he could have bit the inside of his lip and been bleeding from the mouth. So he's very bloody at this point. And then they have him carry his own cross. And this isn't just like, oh, it's a little cross I built him with. Like, these were massive in Roman times. Very heavy, very solid wood. He's carrying it through the street on his back. That's so tender and so raw. And, he falls a couple times and they have him get back up and people are mocking him and laughing at him. And the women are watching this. And then they get him to the cross. And they would have had, because the mechanics of it, they would have had to have laid the cross down and laid him on it, drove the nails into his hands and feet, and then hoisted him up. And through this whole time, we see women watching. And some accounts say that his own mother was there, depending on which verse of the Bible, which chapter you're reading. So here he is, bleeding. He probably screamed out in pain. I mean, he was 100% God and 100% man. So this probably, I guarantee it was not a joyful experience for Jesus. And so we have these women and they're watching him, and it's a slow death. Okay, now let's take a second to think about the women, because these women, right, were people who loved Jesus. You know, Mary raised him from a baby. She would have seen him take his first steps. She would have nursed him. She would have hugged him at night. He tucked him in, seen him grow up, seen him become a man, you know. And then these other women, they would have had meals with him, told stories with him, loved him. Like, think about somebody you really love. You know, maybe it's a nephew or a cousin or a brother or a father or a child. And imagine seeing them go through this kind of suffering. Now, our natural inclination would be to run. Like, I don't want to see this. This is horrible. This is going to scar me for the rest of my life. But these women stayed. Now, why exactly they stayed, we can only speculate, but it was probably had to do with love for Jesus. A lot of it probably had to do with, you know, dedication, being devoted. This is the Son of God, and we're going to stay and watch. And they knew that they were putting themselves in horrible distress, but also in a bit of physical danger, because even though they captured Jesus and, you know, he was on the cross and, you know, being crucified, the hunt wasn't over for the people who followed him. So imagine if this was you, seeing a loved one go through that and having the courage to love them enough to be by their side. And hopefully this never happens to any of you, you know, but if you've ever seen a loved one die of cancer, Alzheimer's, something like that, you kind of have an idea of what these women were really doing, how painful it would have been. And so our first lesson about women in the Bible is about courage and selflessness and love. These women loved Jesus more than they loved themselves. Wow. I mean, if that doesn't say something amazing about the women in the Bible and how important women really are to Christianity, then I don't know what does. So, coming up, we're going to talk about the resurrection.